Energy media readers, everybody these days is preoccupied with the COVID-19 pandemic and the oil price war that's going on between Saudi Arabia and Russia. And particularly if you live in Alberta, this is having a direct effect on the economy and probably on your lifestyle and your paycheck. So what we want to talk about today is the ecosystem of companies, the little service companies, manufacturers, technology companies, finance companies, and so on, that support all of that activity in Alberta, in places like Calgary, and Foothills Industrial, and in Edmonton, and Red Deer, and Lloydminster. To do that, we've got economist Richard Masson, who's with the School of Public Policy. Welcome to the interview, Richard.
Great to be here, Markham.
I know there's not a lot of data on this. It's going to be anecdotal, but can you give me your best guess as to how this downturn is affecting those companies?
Well, they were already struggling, so it's been tough times in the oil patch for a number of years, as everybody knows. Capital spending, which is what drives those service companies, has really declined, about 60% since its peak in 2014. And so those companies, a lot of them had fewer customers. The customers that they had already tried to squeeze them to reduce margins. And so they were running pretty lean. Now we have the challenge of, with the much lower oil prices and very high level of uncertainty, the big companies are going back, the big producers, and saying we need to cut our capital budgets to live within the cash flow that our wells are generating. And so they're cutting budgets 20%, 30%, 40% from what they were going to do based on their outlook for 2020. And all that immediately flows to the small companies, the service companies. They're the ones who have to earn their living every day, right? So if a big company's not going to drill a well, if the producer's not going to drill a well, then that lays off the drilling company, the supplier of the services to the company, the mud, everything else, and those folks are out of work pretty quickly. They're very used to callbacks and layoffs, but right now the level of uncertainty is so high that it's unclear how long this is going to drag on. And so those companies won't be able to absorb less business. They're going to have to take some pretty immediate action with their staff.
And one of the things that people may not know is that, this is a case of if you're a small to medium-sized service company and you're dealing with a larger producer, the producer, now you may get paid in 90 days normally, but when the downturn comes, you might not get paid for 120 days, 150 days, 180 days, because of course the company is stretching out its payables, and you're the one who's expected to finance that.
And you don't have a lot of choices because the producers tend to have several companies that they can work with. And if you're going to say, well, I can't do any more work, the producer will say, I'll get company B to do it. So one of the big challenges I think producers are going to need to keep in mind right now is if they cut too much or push too hard, some of these service companies are going to go out of business, and they're just not going to be there when things start to turn around. We need the governments to step in with emergency financing for the service companies and for a number of producers who just aren't going to be able to live in this environment for very long. Banks don't want to have to call loans because it's very difficult to dispose of the assets and costly right now, but they'll be forced to at some point. So we need a comprehensive plan to deal with this pretty quickly. Otherwise, we're going to see some real carnage in the street.
I think your point about the bankers is really well taken at this point, because what we're seeing is a lot of the juniors, and you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago during an interview, a lot of the juniors are already starved for capital. They're basically hanging on by their fingertips at the largesse of their banker. And this is only going to tip them over the edge. And now ones who maybe were a little better off are going to be in the same position.
Right, because there's a lot of covenants in bank loans, debt to cash flow ratios, those kind of things. They were okay with those ratios at the end of December, but suddenly if your cash flow drops by 50%, you're way offside. And so the banks can give you a little bit of grace time to sort that out. But when we all look forward right now, we don't know if the price is going from $29 down to 20 before it goes up again. And so banks are going to be challenged to provide the grace period that's needed for these companies to see this trough through.
And I think that, it's one thing if you're a small to medium-sized company in places like Calgary and Edmonton, but we often forget about the devastating effect this has on mom and pop operations out in places like Wainwright and Devon and, Drayton Valley and so on. And they, those little communities have already really, really taken a hard hit. And it looks like they're just going to get more of the same over the next 6 to 12 months.
Right. And it's, we can expect this price war to go for quite some time until somebody cries uncle. Both the Russians and the Saudis have a lot of resources. In my mind, the most likely folks who are going to be damaged really hard are folks like Venezuela and Iran, who are already under sanction. And, to see their income even cut further, those economies are already teetering on the verge of collapse. Add in the coronavirus on top of it, and we'll see how this all plays out. But even if all that happens, it takes time for the world's production to ramp down with less drilling. And it's going to take months probably before we start to see any uptick in activity in Alberta. And so, yeah, it's a very challenging environment. The government, both in Alberta and in Ottawa, faces a huge undertaking. And not only is the oil sector at risk, but so many other sectors are as well. So it makes it much more difficult for government to find a path to helping the sector stay solvent.
Final question, Richard. Is there any precedent in past downturns or any chatter out there about what governments might do and how they might support these companies during the next 6 to 12 months as we make this difficult, adjustment?
My only guess is that there are going to have to be some big loans available, not necessarily big, but a big number in aggregate of loans available to businesses with very minimal credit applications and coming out very quickly, because companies don't have the cash flow to meet payroll, to pay their suppliers, taxes, all the things that they need to do. And, banks aren't going to be extending new credit themselves. So it's got to be probably the government doing it either directly through one of its institutions like BDC, or backing the banks with loan guarantees or some other government program that allows them, because they understand these companies best, to say, okay, if this lasts 4 to 6 months, if we give X dollars through loans, these folks should be able to see it through. But certainly hope that we obviously see a turnaround here by the summertime, because otherwise we're going to be in a very, very tough place in Alberta. Final
question, Richard. Is there the possibility, if things don't go the way we hope, if the governments don't respond quickly enough, that we could see a domino effect when we see maybe some companies fail, some producers fail, and then it ripples through the economy, and we see then an escalating number of failures?
Well, absolutely. I think that's part of the big risk we face right now is the whole system is stalling. And so, if one of your customers fails, you can try and find other customers. But right now, there are no other customers. In the last year or two, a lot of Canadian companies moved their activity down to Texas because there was still a lot of activity happening there. Half the drilling rigs from Alberta or so moved down to the States for activity. But now all that's at risk too. And so, everything just shuts down. It makes it extremely difficult. Companies are going to have to lay off their staff, hope for unemployment insurance to help them. But it's really, really a tough time. And I don't have any easy answer. I hope the government has the wisdom to figure something out in a hurry.
Well, on that depressing note, thank you for this, Richard. We're going to be checking in with you regularly to see how the Alberta and Canadian economies, how we're progressing with this. But we've all got our fingers crossed. Thank you, Richard.
Absolutely. Thanks, Markham. Bye-bye.